The desert stretched endlessly beneath a sky that threatened to burn everything alive. Grace Hamilton wiped sweat from her forehead and steadied herself against the saddle of her mare. She had been riding since dawn, following the narrow trail through the canyon that would supposedly lead her to the ranch where her brother worked. 3 months without word from him had brought her from Philadelphia to this unforgiving wilderness, a place where every shadow seemed to hide something dangerous. The horse suddenly stopped, ears flicking nervously. Grace tightened her grip on the reins, scanning the rocks ahead. That's when she heard it, a sound like dry leaves being shaken in a tin can. Before she could react, the rattlesnake struck from beneath a flat stone. Its fangs pierced through her riding boot, sinking into her ankle with a burn that felt like hot iron. She screamed, stumbling backward. The horse reared, and Grace fell hard against the dusty ground. The snake coiled back into the shadows, disappearing as quickly as it had appeared. Pain exploded through her leg, radiating upward with terrifying speed. Her vision blurred as panic seized her chest. She had read about rattlesnake bites during her journey west. Without treatment, she had hours at best. Grace tried to stand, but collapsed immediately. Her leg refused to support her weight. The venom was already working through her bloodstream, making her thoughts slow and heavy. She clawed at her boot, managing to pull it off. 2 puncture wounds leaked blood against swelling flesh that was turning an ugly shade of purple. The world tilted sideways. Through the haze of pain, she heard hoofbeats approaching fast. A rider appeared over the ridge, silhouetted against the merciless sun. Grace tried to call out, but her voice came as barely a whisper. The rider dismounted in one fluid motion, boots hitting the ground with purpose. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a weathered face that spoke of years under this same brutal sky. His dark eyes took in the scene immediately. The frightened horse, Grace crumpled on the ground, the discarded boot, the swelling ankle. "Rattler?" His voice was low and steady, the kind of calm that came from someone who had faced death before and survived. Grace nodded weakly. "Please, I need a doctor. Nearest town is 2 days' ride, and you don't have 2 hours. He knelt beside her, examining the wound with practiced efficiency. "Name's Cole Bennett. I'm going to help you, but you need to trust me and do exactly what I say." He pulled a knife from his belt. The blade caught the sunlight, and Grace's breath caught in her throat. "What are you doing?" "Drawing out the venom. It's the only chance you have." Cole looked at her directly, his gaze unwavering. "This is going to hurt worse than the bite. If you scream, scream, but don't fight me." Before Grace could protest, he made 2 quick incisions across the puncture wounds. Fresh blood welled up, and pain tore through her so intensely that her vision went white. She did scream then, a sound that echoed off the canyon walls and sent birds scattering from their perches. Cole pressed his mouth to the wound and began drawing out the venom with strong, steady pulls. Grace watched through tears as he spat dark blood onto the ground again and again, his jaw set in concentration. The process felt endless, each pull of his mouth sending fresh waves of agony through her body. But beneath the pain, she felt something else, a desperate hope that this stranger might actually save her life. When he finally stopped, Cole ripped a strip from his own shirt and bound her ankle tightly. "We need to slow the spread. Keep your leg still." Grace's breathing came in short gasps. "Why are you helping me?" "Because leaving you here would make me the kind of man I spent my whole life trying not to be." He lifted her easily, carrying her to the shade of a large boulder. "We'll camp here tonight. You need rest, and I need to watch that wound." As he laid her down gently, Grace studied his face. There were scars there, faint lines that told stories of violence survived. His hands, though rough and calloused, had been surprisingly gentle. "My brother," she managed to say. "I'm looking for my brother, Daniel Hamilton. Do you know him?" Something flickered across Cole's expression. Recognition, maybe, or concern. "I know him. He works at the Crawford Ranch about 15 miles north." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "When did you last hear from him?" 3 months ago. He wrote saying he'd found work, that everything was fine, then nothing." Cole's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He turned away to tend to the horses, but Grace caught the tension in his shoulders. Something about her brother's name had affected him, and the realization sent a chill through her despite the oppressive heat. "You know something," she said, her voice stronger despite the pain. "Tell me. Rest now. We'll talk when you're stronger." Cole built a small fire as the sun began its descent, the desert temperature already starting to drop. He worked in silence, his movements efficient and purposeful. Grace wanted to press him, to demand answers, but exhaustion was pulling her under. The venom still coursed through her system, making her limbs heavy and her thoughts sluggish. As darkness crept across the sky, she fought to keep her eyes open, afraid that if she slept, she might never wake up. Cole noticed her struggle. He moved closer, sitting where she could see him clearly. "Sleep. I'll watch over you tonight. You have my word." There was something in the way he said it, a gravity that made Grace believe him. Against every instinct that told her not to trust a stranger in this lawless land, she let her eyes close. But as sleep claimed her, one thought remained sharp and clear in her fading consciousness. Cole Bennett knew something about Daniel, and whatever it was, he didn't want to tell her. The last thing she heard was Cole's voice, low and almost too quiet to catch. "I'm sorry, Grace Hamilton. Sorry for what you're going to find." When Grace woke, stars filled the sky like scattered diamonds, and the fire had burned down to glowing embers. Her leg throbbed with a deep, persistent ache, but the sharp, burning pain had subsided. She tried to move and immediately regretted it. "Easy." Cole appeared beside her, his face illuminated by firelight. He held a canteen to her lips. "Drink slowly. You've been sweating out what little water you had." The water was warm but tasted like salvation. Grace drank carefully, then met his eyes. "How long was I asleep?" 4 hours, maybe 5. "Your fever broke about an hour ago. That's a good sign." He checked the bandage on her ankle, his touch clinical and detached. "The swelling's going down. You'll live, though you won't be walking properly for a few days." Grace pushed herself up to sitting, ignoring the protest from her body. "You said you know my brother. I need you to tell me everything." Cole was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of someone delivering bad news. "Daniel works at the Crawford Ranch. That much is true, but things aren't what you think." "What does that mean?" "Samuel Crawford runs that ranch like a fortress. Men who ride for him don't leave, not easily. Your brother, he got mixed up in something, and now he's in deep. The kind of deep where writing letters home becomes dangerous." Grace felt her chest tighten. "You're saying he's in trouble?" "I'm saying the ranch isn't just a ranch. Crawford uses it as a front for other operations. Cattle theft mostly, but there's talk of worse. Men who cross him disappear into the desert. Men who know too much never make it to town to tell anyone." The firelight cast dancing shadows across Cole's face, making him look both dangerous and impossibly sad. Grace studied him carefully, searching for deception and finding only grim honesty. "How do you know all this?" she asked. "Because I used to ride for Crawford myself." The admission hung in the air between them like smoke. 2 years ago, I saw what kind of man he really was. I tried to leave, and he made sure I understood the price of betrayal. Cole turned, and even in the dim light, Grace could see the scar that ran from his ear down the side of his neck, disappearing beneath his collar. It was thick and raised, the kind of wound that should have killed a man. "He left you for dead," Grace whispered. "Close enough. I survived out of pure stubbornness and crawled my way to a mission station 50 miles south. The priest there patched me up, asked no questions. When I healed, I drifted, taking work where I could find it, staying away from anything that might bring me back into Crawford's orbit." He looked at her directly. "Until now? Why help me then, if it's that dangerous?" "Because your brother saved my life once before things went bad. We worked the same cattle drive 3 years back. There was a stampede and I got thrown from my horse, landed wrong. Daniel pulled me out before 1,000 head of cattle could turn me into dust. I owe him a debt." Cole's expression hardened. "And because I've spent 2 years being a coward, maybe it's time to stop running." Grace absorbed this information, her mind racing despite the lingering effects of the venom. "Take me to the ranch. I'll get Daniel out myself if I have to." "You can barely sit up, let alone ride into a place like that. Crawford has 20 men, maybe more, all loyal because he pays well and kills anyone who isn't. You'd be dead before you reach the front gate. Then what do you suggest? I came all this way. I'm not leaving without my brother." Cole poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling into the night. "There might be a way. Crawford throws a gathering every month, brings in ranchers from the surrounding territories for gambling and drinking. Security gets lax during those nights. If we time it right, we could slip in, find Daniel, and get out before anyone notices." "When's the next gathering?" 3 days from now." He met her eyes again. "But you need to understand what you're asking. If we get caught, Crawford won't just kill us. He'll make it slow, make it an example. This isn't some adventure story from one of those dime novels back east. This is real, and the stakes are your life. Grace thought of Daniel, of the brother who had practically raised her after their parents died, who had gone west to make money so she could finish school. She thought of 3 months of silence, of letters that never came, of nights wondering if he was even still alive. "I understand," she said firmly, "and I'm still going." Something like respect flickered in Cole's eyes. "Then we have 3 days to get you back on your feet and teach you how to survive in Crawford's world." He handed her a piece of dried meat from his saddlebag. Grace took it, chewing slowly, her mind already working through possibilities and dangers. The desert night pressed in around them, full of sounds she didn't recognize. The distant cry of a coyote, the rustle of something moving through brush, the whisper of wind through stone. "Tell me about the ranch," she said. "Everything. I need to know what we're walking into." Cole settled back against a rock, his rifle resting across his lap. "Crawford built the main house against a cliff face, gives him protection on one side. There's a bunkhouse where the men sleep, a stable, a barn, and a separate building where he keeps his office and whatever else he doesn't want people seeing. The whole compound is surrounded by a fence, not high enough to keep anyone out, but enough to slow them down and make noise." Where would Daniel be? If he's still working as a regular ranch hand, the bunkhouse. But if Crawford suspects he might run or talk, there's a root cellar beneath the main house. That's where problems get stored until Crawford decides what to do with them. The casual way Cole spoke about human beings being stored made Grace's blood run cold. "Has he killed people?" "Yes." No hesitation, no sugarcoating. "I've seen bodies, Grace. Men who ask too many questions or threaten to go to the law. Crawford doesn't take chances with his operation." Grace felt the weight of fear settle into her stomach, but she pushed it down. Fear wouldn't help Daniel. "What about allies? Is there anyone at the ranch who might help us?" Cole considered this. "Maybe. There's a man named Abraham, older fellow who tends the horses. He's been there longer than anyone, and Crawford trusts him because Abraham keeps his mouth shut and his eyes down. But I remember him being kind, the type who might still have a conscience hidden under all that silence. If Daniel's in trouble, Abraham would know. Can we trust him? In this situation, we can't trust anyone completely, but Abraham's probably our best shot at getting information without raising alarm." They talked deep into the night, Cole describing the layout of the ranch in meticulous detail, Grace committing every word to memory. She learned about the guard rotations, the blind spots in Crawford's security, the habits of the men who rode for him. Cole's knowledge was thorough, the product of 2 years spent looking over his shoulder and understanding exactly what he'd escaped from. As the fire died down to nothing and the cold of the desert night wrapped around them, Grace found herself watching Cole's profile against the starlight. He was a hard man, shaped by violence and survival, but there was something else there too, a decency he hadn't quite managed to bury despite everything he'd been through. "Why did you really come back to this area?" she asked quietly. "If you've been running for 2 years, why get this close to Crawford again?" Cole was silent for so long that Grace thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Because running doesn't fix anything. It just postpones the inevitable. Crawford won't forget about me, and I can't spend the rest of my life looking over my shoulder, waiting for the day his men find me." He turned to look at her. "Maybe saving your brother is a way to balance the scales. Maybe it's just a chance to prove I'm still worth something. I don't know anymore." The raw honesty in his words struck Grace deeply. She reached out, placing her hand over his. "You saved my life today. That proves you're worth something." Cole looked down at their hands, then carefully pulled away. "Get some rest. Tomorrow we start preparing, and I need you sharp." He moved to the other side of the fire, putting distance between them. Grace understood the gesture for what it was, a man protecting himself from connection, from caring too much about someone who might die in 3 days. She lay back down, her ankle still aching, but manageable now. Above her, the Milky Way stretched across the sky in a river of light. Somewhere beneath these same stars, Daniel was either working, sleeping, or locked in a cellar, waiting for mercy that might never come. Grace closed her eyes and made a silent promise to the universe. She would find her brother, she would get him out, and she would make Samuel Crawford pay for every moment of fear and silence he'd forced upon people who only wanted to live free. Beside the dying fire, Cole kept watch, his rifle ready, his eyes scanning the darkness for threats. Neither of them spoke about the danger ahead, about the very real possibility that they might not survive the next 3 days. Some things didn't need to be said aloud to be understood. The desert night moved around them, indifferent to their plans, their fears, their desperate hope for survival. Morning came with brutal efficiency, the sun transforming the desert from freezing to scorching within an hour. Grace woke to find Cole already moving, breaking down their minimal camp with practiced speed. Her ankle screamed in protest when she tried to stand, but she gritted her teeth and pushed through the pain. "Let me see it," Cole said, kneeling beside her. He unwrapped the bandage carefully. The swelling had gone down considerably overnight, and the angry purple had faded to a mottled yellow and green. The incisions he'd made were clean, already beginning to scab over. "You heal fast," he observed. "That's good. You'll need every advantage." He rewrapped the ankle with fresh cloth, then helped her to her feet. Grace swayed slightly but managed to stay upright. "We need to get you walking properly," Cole said. "Can't have you limping into Crawford's ranch. You'll draw attention we can't afford." For the next hour, he put her through what felt like torture disguised as physical therapy, walking back and forth across the campsite, putting weight on the injured ankle, pushing through the pain until sweat poured down her face and her jaw ached from clenching against the urge to scream. "Good," Cole said each time she completed a circuit. Again. By midday, Grace was walking with only a slight limp. Her body was exhausted, but something else had awakened inside her. A hardness, a determination that felt almost foreign. The proper Philadelphia lady who had boarded the train weeks ago would never have survived what she'd endured in the last 24 hours. Grace wasn't sure who she was becoming, but she knew there was no going back. They rode slowly through the afternoon, Cole leading them along paths that avoided main trails. He taught her as they went, pointing out landmarks, showing her how to read the desert's subtle signs, which plants indicated water nearby, which rock formations provided the best shelter, how to spot a dust cloud that might signal riders in the distance. "You learned fast," he commented, after she correctly identified a safe place to rest the horses. "I've always been good at learning," Grace replied. "My teachers back home said I had an unusual aptitude for retaining information." "Ah, this isn't a classroom, and the tests out here don't give second chances." "I'm aware of that." She met his challenging gaze without flinching. "I'm still here, aren't I?" Something like approval crossed his face. "That you are." They made camp that evening in a narrow canyon that provided protection from wind and prying eyes. Cole showed her how to build a fire that produced minimal smoke, how to position herself so she could see approaches from multiple directions, how to sleep light enough to wake at the first sound of trouble. "Tell me about Daniel," he said as they ate a simple meal of beans and coffee. "What kind of man is he?" Grace smiled despite everything. "Stubborn, loyal to a fault. He always wanted to protect people, even when we were children. When our parents died in the cholera outbreak, Daniel was only 16, but he took care of me like he'd been doing it his whole life. He worked 3 jobs to keep us fed, made sure I stayed in school." Her smile faded. "He came west because the opportunities back home dried up, said he could make real money out here, enough to give us both a better life. And instead he found Crawford." "Instead he found Crawford," Grace echoed. The weight of those words settled between them. "Cole, what if we're too late? What if Daniel's already—" "Don't," Cole interrupted firmly. "Don't finish that thought. We operate on the assumption he's alive until we know otherwise. Fear will get you killed faster than any bullet." Grace nodded, pushing down the terror that threatened to overwhelm her. "Teach me to shoot." Cole raised an eyebrow. "You've never handled a gun?" "I've seen them. I've never fired one." He pulled his revolver from its holster, checked it carefully, then handed it to her. The weight surprised Grace. It was heavier than she'd expected, the metal cold against her palm. "This is a Colt Peacemaker," Cole explained. 6 shots. You pull back the hammer with your thumb, aim, squeeze the trigger smooth and steady, don't jerk it, breathe out as you fire. He positioned himself behind her, adjusting her grip, showing her how to sight down the barrel. Grace tried to focus on his instructions, but she was acutely aware of his presence, the solid warmth of him, the way his voice dropped lower when he spoke close to her ear. "See that cactus about 30 feet out?" he said. "Aim for the center." Grace did as instructed, pulling back the hammer. The click seemed impossibly loud. She breathed out and squeezed the trigger. The gun roared, kicking back hard enough to make her stumble. The bullet struck earth 10 feet to the left of the cactus. "Again," Cole said patiently. They worked until darkness made shooting impossible. By the end, Grace was hitting the cactus 3 times out of 6. Her hands were sore, her ears ringing, but she felt more capable than she had that morning. "You'll do," Cole said, and from him that felt like high praise. That night, wrapped in a blanket against the cold, Grace found herself unable to sleep despite her exhaustion. Her mind kept circling back to Crawford's ranch, to all the things that could go wrong, to the very real possibility that she might die trying to save her brother. "You're thinking too much," Cole's voice came from across the fire. "How can you tell? You're breathing. It's fast, shallow. You're scared. Shouldn't I be? Fear's natural. It's what keeps you alive, but you can't let it control you." He shifted in the darkness. "Tell me something about your life back east. Something good." The request surprised Grace. "Why?" "Because sometimes remembering what you're fighting to get back to helps steady the nerves." Grace thought for a moment. "There's a park near where I lived. Daniel used to take me there on Sunday afternoons. We'd sit by this fountain and he'd make up stories about the people walking by. Ridiculous stories about secret identities and hidden adventures." She smiled at the memory. He'd say that the old woman with the parasol was actually a retired spy, or that the banker in the suit was really a pirate in disguise. It made the whole world seem magical, like anything was possible. "Sounds like he was trying to give you hope," Cole said quietly. "He was. Even when things were desperate, even when we had nothing, Daniel found ways to make me believe everything would work out." Grace's throat tightened. "That's why I have to save him. He spent his whole life taking care of me. It's my turn now." Silence fell between them, comfortable and understanding. When Cole finally spoke again, his voice carried a gentleness she hadn't heard before. "We'll get him out, Grace. I promise you that, whatever it takes." She wanted to believe him. In that moment, listening to the desert night and feeling the certainty in his voice, she almost did. The third day dawned with a sense of inevitability. Today, they would get close to Crawford's ranch, scout the approaches, finalize their plan. Tomorrow night, during the gathering, they would make their move. Cole was quieter than usual as they rode, his eyes constantly scanning the horizon. Grace noticed the change in him, the way his shoulders tensed, how his hand never strayed far from his rifle. They were entering dangerous territory, and every mile brought them closer to a confrontation that could end in death. By noon, they reached a ridge overlooking a valley. Cole pulled up his horse and gestured for Grace to do the same. "There," he said, pointing. Below them, perhaps 2 miles distant, sat Crawford's ranch. Grace could see everything Cole had described: the main house built against the cliff, the bunkhouse and barn, the corral where horses moved lazily in the heat. Smoke rose from a chimney, and even from this distance she could make out figures moving between buildings. 23 men, Cole counted quietly. "More than I expected." Crawford's expanded his operation. "Does that change our plan?" "Makes it more dangerous, but the basic approach still works. During the gathering, most of those men will be occupied, drinking, gambling, distracted. That's when we move." They spent the afternoon watching the ranch, noting patterns in how the men moved, where guards were posted, when they changed shifts. Grace committed it all to memory, building a mental map of the layout and rhythms of the place. As the sun began to set, Cole led them to a sheltered spot several miles from the ranch, hidden among rocks and brush. "We'll stay here tonight and tomorrow. Come dark tomorrow, we make our approach." Setting up camp, Grace felt the weight of what lay ahead pressing down on her. "Cole, can I ask you something?" "Go ahead." "If you could go back, would you have left Crawford sooner? Before it got as bad as it did?" He was quiet for a long time, staring at the small fire he'd built. "I ask myself that every day. I knew what he was, knew what he was doing. But I told myself it wasn't my business, that as long as I kept my head down and did my job, I could stay clean." He looked up at her. "I was wrong. There's no staying clean when you're part of something dirty. By the time I tried to leave, I'd already compromised myself in ways I can't take back." "Ooh, you got out eventually. That counts for something." "Does it? How many people suffered while I stood by and did nothing?" The pain in his voice was raw and real. "Your brother? He started asking questions about 6 months ago. I heard him talking to Abraham, saying things didn't add up, that he'd seen Crawford's men doing things that weren't legitimate ranch work. I should have warned him to stop, to keep quiet. Instead, I stayed silent because I was afraid of drawing attention to myself." Grace moved closer to him. "You can't blame yourself for Daniel's choices. He's always been the type to stand up when he sees something wrong. And that kind of integrity gets you killed out here." Cole's jaw tightened. "Tomorrow night, we're going to even the scales. We get Daniel out, and maybe I can start living with myself again." They sat together in the gathering darkness, 2 people bound by circumstance and shared purpose, both carrying guilt they couldn't quite set down. The next day crawled by with agonizing slowness. Grace tried to rest, to conserve her energy for what lay ahead, but sleep proved impossible. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw a dozen different ways their plan could fail. Cole checked and rechecked their supplies. Weapons, rope, the dark clothing he'd acquired from a trader 2 days back. Everything they'd need for a night infiltration. His movements were methodical, almost ritualistic, the actions of a man preparing for battle. As afternoon faded toward evening, he sat down beside Grace. "There's something you need to understand about what we're doing tonight. Once we're inside that compound, there's no room for hesitation. If someone sees us, if they raise an alarm, we might have to fight our way out. That means shooting people, Grace, killing them if necessary." She met his eyes steadily. "I understand." "Do you? Because it's different when it's real. When you're looking at a man's face and pulling the trigger, it changes you in ways you can't predict." "I'll do whatever I have to do to save my brother." Grace's voice didn't waver. "Even if it changes me." Cole studied her face, searching for doubt and finding only determination. "All right then, when it gets dark, we move." The sun set in a spectacular display of orange and red, the desert sky burning like it knew what was coming. Grace changed into the dark clothes Cole had provided, bound her hair back tightly, checked the revolver he'd given her. Her hands were steady despite the fear thrumming through her veins. They left the horses hidden, making the final approach on foot. The desert night wrapped around them, and Grace was grateful for everything Cole had taught her over the past 3 days. She moved quietly, stepping where he stepped, avoiding loose rocks and brittle brush that might give them away. As they drew closer to the ranch, sounds reached them: laughter, music from a badly tuned piano, the clink of bottles and rough male voices. The gathering was in full swing. Cole led them to the eastern side of the compound, where the fence met a dry creek bed. He'd explained earlier that this was the weakest point in Crawford's security, the place least watched because the terrain made approach difficult. They climbed the fence in silence, dropping into the compound's outer edge. Grace's heart hammered so hard she was certain everyone for miles could hear it. But no alarm sounded, no shouts of discovery rang out. Cole moved like a shadow, and Grace followed, keeping close. They skirted the main house, where light spilled from windows and the sounds of the gathering were loudest. Grace caught glimpses through the windows. Men crowded around tables, cards in hand, bottles being passed, Crawford himself holding court in the center of it all. Samuel Crawford was a big man, she saw, with a thick beard and eyes that gleamed with cruel intelligence even from a distance. Just looking at him made Grace's skin crawl. They reached the bunkhouse, a long, low building set apart from the main house. Cole pressed his ear to the door, listening. Then he carefully eased it open. Inside, the bunkhouse was dim and mostly empty. The few men who weren't at the gathering were passed out drunk in their bunks, snoring loudly. Cole and Grace moved through the room carefully, checking faces in the darkness. Daniel wasn't there. Cole's expression hardened. He gestured for Grace to follow him back outside. They moved through the shadows to the back of the main house, where Cole had said the root cellar entrance would be. They found it, a wooden door set into the ground, secured with a heavy padlock. Cole pulled a set of lockpicks from his pocket and went to work. Grace kept watch, her hand on the revolver at her hip, every nerve screaming with tension. The lock clicked open. Cole lifted the door slowly, revealing stairs descending into darkness. They went down together, Grace's eyes adjusting to the deeper gloom. The cellar smelled of earth and something else: fear, desperation, human suffering. And there, in the corner, chained to the wall, was Daniel. Grace nearly cried out, but caught herself just in time. She rushed to her brother, dropping to her knees beside him. Daniel's face was bruised, his clothes torn and dirty, but his eyes widened with recognition and disbelief when he saw her. "Grace?" His voice was barely a whisper, cracked from disuse or screaming. "What are you doing here?" "Getting you out," she said, her hands shaking as she examined the chains. "Cole, how do we—" Cole was already there with his picks, working on the lock that secured Daniel's shackles. "Stay quiet," he murmured. "We're not safe yet." The chains fell away, and Daniel collapsed forward. Grace and Cole caught him, supporting his weight between them. He was weak, barely able to stand, but his eyes were clear and focused. "Crawford knows everything," Daniel gasped. "I heard him talking. He's planning something big, something that'll—" A boot scraped on the stairs above them. Everyone froze. A voice called down, thick with drink but alert enough. "Who's down there?" Cole's hand went to his gun, but before he could draw, Grace made a decision. She pulled her revolver and fired up the stairs. The shot was deafening in the enclosed space. The man at the top of the stairs screamed and fell, his body tumbling down into the cellar. For one frozen second, everything was silence. Then all hell broke loose. Shouts erupted from above, boots thundered on floorboards. The alarm had been raised, and there was no longer any chance of slipping away unnoticed. Move! Cole shouted, practically carrying Daniel up the stairs. They burst out of the cellar into chaos. Men were spilling out of the main house, some armed, some fumbling for weapons. Grace fired twice more, not aiming for people, but for the lanterns hanging near the house. Glass shattered, and flames spread across the wooden porch. The distraction bought them seconds. Cole dragged Daniel toward the fence while Grace covered their retreat, firing at anyone who came too close. Her hands were steady now, all fear burned away by desperate necessity. They reached the fence. Cole lifted Daniel over while Grace kept shooting. Behind them, Crawford's voice rose above the confusion, bellowing orders to his men. Grace scrambled over the fence, her ankle screaming in protest. Strong hands caught her on the other side. Cole, his face grim and focused. Together they hauled Daniel between them and ran. Bullets whipped through the air. Men were coming over the fence behind them. Pursuit already organized. But Cole knew this terrain better than Crawford's men. He led them through the darkness with sure-footed confidence, taking a path that only someone who'd ridden this land for years would know. They reached the horses. Grace and Cole lifted Daniel into the saddle of Grace's mare, then mounted their own horses. Behind them, torches were being lit. Men were mounting up. The hunt was on. Cole met Grace's eyes across the darkness. Ride hard. Don't stop for anything. They rode. The desert night became a blur of motion and fear. Grace's world narrowed to the horse beneath her, the terrain ahead, the sounds of pursuit behind. Shots rang out, but distance and darkness made accurate aim impossible. They rode for hours, pushing the horses to the edge of their endurance. Only when the sounds of pursuit had faded completely did Cole finally slow their pace. They stopped in a canyon where rocks rose up on all sides, creating a natural fortress. Daniel slid from the horse, collapsing against the canyon wall. Grace rushed to him, checking him over in the moonlight. His face was a mess of bruises, and when he moved he winced with pain that spoke of broken ribs. But he was alive, conscious, and they had him. You shouldn't have come, Daniel said, but there was no anger in his voice, only wonder and something like pride. You could have been killed. So could you, Grace replied, tears finally coming now that the immediate danger had passed. I couldn't leave you there, Danny. I couldn't. Crawford will come after us, Daniel warned, looking at Cole. He doesn't let anyone go. You know that. I know, Cole said grimly, which is why we keep moving at first light. We'll head south to the mission station I told Grace about. The priest there, Father Miguel, he'll help us. From there, we can figure out our next move. Daniel's eyes widened slightly. You're Cole Bennett. I remember you. You disappeared 2 years back. Everyone said Crawford killed you. He tried. Didn't take. Despite everything, Daniel smiled faintly. Thank you for bringing my sister here safely and for helping get me out. Thank her, Cole said. She's the one who came looking for you. I just showed her the way. Grace sat beside her brother, holding his hand, feeling the reality of his presence after 3 months of fear and uncertainty. They had done it. Against impossible odds, they had actually done it. But as she looked at Cole standing guard at the canyon entrance, his rifle ready, his eyes scanning the darkness for threats, Grace knew their ordeal wasn't over. Crawford was still out there, and men like him didn't forgive. They would be hunted, pursued, possibly for the rest of their lives. And somehow, that knowledge didn't frighten her as much as it should have. She had changed in these past days, had discovered strengths she never knew she possessed. The woman who had been bitten by that rattlesnake felt like someone from another lifetime. Grace Hamilton had died on that desert trail. What had emerged was someone harder, more capable, more willing to fight for the people she loved, and she was just getting started.